On Saturday in Happy Valley, the Oregon Ducks pulled off one of the most impressive wins I've seen in recent memory. How does that shift my expectation for the 2025 season? Good evening, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Soder Report. My name is Kyle Soder. Today, we've got an Oregon Ducks themed episode for you guys. I promised you a couple days ago I'd get you one massive win in Happy Valley on Saturday. So I wanted to get my thoughts on it because there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to unpack in this game specifically, but on the entire season as a whole. So we're going to get to that. But before we do, we are sponsored here. The Soda Report is sponsored by Elite Cacao Supplements. Head on over to www.Elite Cacao Supplements. Get your cacao supplements today. They will help with your focus, your memory retention, and overall cognitive ability. I use it all the time in school for tests, for studying, and it's worked wonders. It's similar to caffeine, but without the non-addictive effects. So head on over there, get your Elite Cacao supplements today. Now, let's get to the game in Happy Valley. Well, let's get to the 2025 season as a whole, because I haven't done a podcast on Oregon this year. I usually like to sit back and take a long-term approach with my podcasts. I don't like to react to each and every little thing that happens. I like to sit back. I gave my preseason expectation for what the Oregon Ducks were capable of. And this was a significant game. Week 1 against Montana State, they did what I thought they should do. Although the game last year against the Idaho Vandals came to mind before that game. Luckily, we did not get a repeat of that. Oklahoma State was impressive, but they're not a very good team either. So that doesn't tell me a lot about the team. Northwestern, they dominated that game better than the score indicates. But again, doesn't tell me a lot about the team. And Oregon State, same thing. So Oregon went 4-0, and my expectation of the team did not shift one bit. My expectation of the team coming into the season was that they would lose the game in Happy Valley, which obviously they didn't. And I thought they would drop another game sometime during the year, maybe against Iowa, maybe against Washington, maybe against Indiana, something. So we'll get to how the expectation for this team shifts, but Penn State was the first real, in my mind, the first real data point for who this team is. And the Ducks certainly impressed in that whiteout in Happy Valley with 111,000 people in attendance. I want to get to the coaching matchups because I thought that was the difference in this game. So most of the podcast is going to be focused on the coaching. I want to start out with Dante Moore, though. I thought that, well, I'll save him for later. So let's start with Dan Lanning versus James Franklin. I thought that, I think everyone, pretty much everyone coming into this game who is removed from the Ducks and Nittany Lions programs, would have said that Dan Lanning is a better head coach than James Franklin. And that was on display Saturday night. The Ducks versus Them podcast, or documentary, The Ducks versus Them I said it again. Wow. Let me try this one more time. The Ducks versus Them documentary outlined why Dan Lanning is such a great coach. He specializes in motivating his players. I thought that the preparation, where they were holding loudspeakers up to the huddle in practice, right behind Dante Moore's head, blasting Mo Bamba in their ears. I thought that was great. I thought it was interesting. I would imagine that most teams do that, but it was cool to see it, because we don't see documentaries on other teams. We don't see that happening in practice, and it was just cool to see. And I thought that his messaging for the game was perfect. 1,000 cuts. You make a tackle in the hole, that's a cut. You get a 5-yard gain on the ground, that's a cut. And I thought that it was perfect for this game, because it took 1,000 cuts to take down Penn State on the road. I thought that the difference between Dan Lanning, specifically from a strategic coaching standpoint, was interesting as well. I think it's obvious that Dan Lanning motivates his players better than James Franklin does. But specifically from a strategic standpoint, I thought that in that realm of coaching, the biggest difference was on display in a couple of situations, a lot. Specifically, Dan Lanning was 5 for 7 on 4th down. He went for it on 4th down 7 times in this game and converted 5. And that's something that he took a lot of criticism for, as I'm sure you've heard before. If you've tuned into any Oregon Ducks podcast this week, you've heard the Washington 4th down attempt get brought up. But what no one else is really talking about is James Franklin. There was a possession at the beginning of the second half. Penn State's offense hadn't done anything. They'd put up 3 points the entire game. They were getting outgained by, I think Oregon had twice the amount of yards that Penn State had at this point in the game. But Penn State's finally putting together a drive. And Penn State gets to the Oregon Ducks' 36-yard line. And they get to 4th down. And they punt. What? From the Oregon 36, you punt? What? My wife was right next to me, and she was a little bit confused why I was cheering when I saw the punt team come on the field. So I had to explain that. But I think that punting on Oregon's 36 was one of the biggest mistakes in the game, and no one's talking about it. That's just... like, even if they had pinned Oregon within the 5, that would be one thing. But the punt went into the end zone for a touchback. So they got all the way to Oregon's 36, they punted, and Oregon got it on the 20. You might as well have just had Drew Aller throw a ball 20 yards down the field. If it got picked, whatever. Maybe there's a PI. Maybe your receiver makes an awesome catch. But I thought that the difference in the aggression that both coaches had was very telling. Dan Lanning 5 for 7 on fourth down. James Franklin punting on Oregon's 36-yard line. I mean, attempt a 53-yarder. I don't know. Just the punt, I think, is the worst thing you could have done in that situation. Because your offense isn't doing anything. They're finally putting together a drive. And I think that deflated the Penn State sideline again. And then after that, we know Oregon marches down. They scored 2 touchdowns on 2 drives. They take a 17-3 lead at the beginning of the fourth quarter. So that was a massive turning point in that game. And James Franklin gave it to the Ducks. Now, the coordinators. This is arguably a more interesting topic than Dan Lanning versus James Franklin, because everyone knows Dan Lanning is a better head coach than James Franklin. But Will Stein versus Jim Knowles, that had some serious question marks coming in to this game. Obviously, I don't want to bring back anyone's post-traumatic stress disorder, but the Rose Bowl on January 1st, 2025, the massacre that I don't speak of, just didn't go well. I'm not even going to get into it because that was one of the worst days of my life. But the Rose Bowl went horrible. Stein got destroyed by Jim Knowles. Jim Knowles B to B on Will Stein. So I thought that was an interesting matchup coming into this game. And if you look at the score through the quarters, I think you would say that Jim Knowles won that matchup, keeping Oregon to 17 points. Penn State kept Oregon to 17 points. That should be good enough for Penn State to win that game. But Oregon was moving the ball all day. And I just mentioned Oregon was 5 for 7 on fourth down. So that brings a little more context into it. Once you bring the context into it, it was a pretty even matchup between the two. And I thought that Will Stein did a really good job of keeping things very simple for Dante Moore. I thought he did a good job of protecting Dante Moore, not putting too much on his plate. Things were it reminded me of if you watched the season opener between Ohio State and Texas. It reminded me of the way that Steve Sarkisian was calling plays for Arch Manning and the way that Ryan Day was calling plays for Julian Sayin. They kept it very simple. The offense was kind of vanilla, kind of bland, but the overall goal was just to not make mistakes. Don't turn the football over. And they didn't. Oregon did not turn the ball over all game. The grass is part of the ground, by the way. Seen a lot of crying Penn State fans saying that he wasn't down. The grass is part of the ground. I'm sorry, and it was targeting. So anyway, I thought that Stein did a very good job in this game. And then I want to talk about Dante Moore. I was going to do this at the beginning of the podcast. I think it's appropriate to do it now that we're talking about Will Stein keeping things very easy, very simple for Dante Moore. coming out of this game, Dante Moore's starting to get a lot of Heisman hype. He's actually the betting favorite in a lot of places that you look at. And that actually really surprised me from what I saw. Like I said, I thought that Will Stein kept things very simple, very vanilla. It was run for 3 yards, screen for 2 yards, run for 3 yards, run for 3 yards on 4th down. Next set of downs, it was screen for 4 yards, run for 3 yards, run for 2 yards, run for 2 yards, 1st down. That's sort of how the first half felt to me. And that's how it felt to me when I went back and rewatched the game again. And don't get me wrong, Dante Moore executed that game plan. And he didn't turn the ball over, and he had 3 touchdowns. I don't know if this performance was something that I would say put him in the lead for the Heisman Trophy, if that makes sense. I don't know that Dante Moore was a dominant playmaker in this game. He did his job, but I don't think that this is a Heisman Trophy performance. It was good. 248 yards, 74% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns, no picks. You would take that any day. And he had some key runs in there as well. But did he showcase a Heisman moment in that game? Maybe you could argue in double overtime when he shook the edge rusher, came back, fired a strike to Gary Bryant Jr., who went 25 yards for the touchdown on the first play. Maybe. To me, that's a first-round pick moment instead of a Heisman moment. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think Dante Moore has hit his ceiling yet. I don't think he's playing as well as he could as a quarterback in Oregon's system. I think that there is a lot more good that he can do. I think that there's another level to his game that he can unlock. And I think that is when, in my opinion, this obviously isn't shared by the bettors in Las Vegas, but in my opinion, when he brings it to that next step, that's when he would become a Heisman Trophy finalist, in my eyes. Maybe that comes against Indiana at home. Maybe that comes in the Big Ten Championship against Ohio State, against Indiana, against Penn State, whatever. But I think there's another level to his game that he can unlock. I thought that most of the offensive performance was based on Dante Moore being asked not to throw an interception. And I don't think Heisman Trophy winners are asked not to make mistakes. I think they're asked to put the team on their back and drag them kicking and screaming to victory every week. So that's my opinion. You guys might disagree. I'm open-minded, honestly. If there's a moment in that game that you think was a Heisman moment, please drop it in the comments. I'll go back and watch it because that was a great game to watch. But for me personally, coming out of that game, I don't know if... I thought the Heisman hype train kind of took me by surprise. The John Mateer Heisman campaign a couple weeks ago after beating Michigan took me way by surprise. Like, I didn't understand that. But I think Stein and Knowles was a pretty even matchup, and that was a welcome sight because Jim Knowles cleaned Will Stein's clock on the first day of this calendar year. The next matchup was Tosh Lupoy versus Andy Kotelnicki. And this was another matchup that Tosh Lupoy lost, in my opinion, in the Big Ten championship game. Obviously, Stein had the matchup versus Knowles when he was with Ohio State. He comes over to Penn State. But Lupoy and Kotelnicki, they were both in these programs last year. Kotelnicki was with Penn State, Lupoy with Oregon, obviously. And in my opinion, Andy Kotelnicki definitely got the best of Tosh Lupoy. They won that Big Ten championship because their offense was firing on all cylinders. They won it because they put up 45 points. And Penn State lost it because 38 points wasn't enough. And most games, 38 points should be enough to win the game, but it just wasn't. But that was another matchup that I had my eye on coming into the season. Coming into this game, rather. I was a bit concerned about Tosh Lupoy. In that game, Andy Kotelnicki used a lot of tempo. He used a lot of motions. He used a lot of shifts. And it confused the Oregon defense. And Ohio State did the same thing 3 weeks later. And the most concerning thing coming out of that game, I thought, was Oregon had 3 weeks to self-scout from that Penn State game. And they looked worse when it came to handling shifts and motions and tempo. So that was something that I was really concerned with coming into this game. And the Penn State offense didn't really... They had a half of a quarter where they got into a groove where they could use tempo and motion. And they did a lot better against Oregon's defense then, but it was half a quarter. So I'm not going to say that Andy Kotelnicki won the battle because Penn State got the better of Oregon's defense for half a quarter. Lupoy dominated that matchup. And that's not something that we've been able to say about a big game the whole time that Dan Lanning has been with Oregon. The whole time Tosh Lupoy has been the defensive coordinator. Those are both defensive guys, but in their big wins, it was the offense coming through. They allowed 30 plus points to Boise. They allowed 31 points to Ohio State. They allowed 38 points to Penn State. They allowed 41 to Ohio State. So their defense hadn't really showed up in these big games, which was concerning because they have been led by a defensive head coach for this is year 4. Is that right? Yes, year 4. But in this game was won on the defensive side of the ball. On the defensive line. Well, I take that back. It was won on the defensive side of the ball. The secondary played great. I'm actually going to go off script here, talk about the Oregon secondary. They don't know what they don't know yet. And by that, what I mean is Brandon Finney doesn't know that he's not supposed to lock up Trevor Pena. Ife Obadegwu, I feel bad for him because his last name gets pronounced wrong by every single announcer. Obadegwu. I think is what they call him, Ife Obadegwu, doesn't know that he's not supposed to put the clamps down on whoever's on his side of the field. And it's a welcome sight to see. It's the secondary absolutely locked down Penn State's receiving threats. Drew Aller threw for less than 200 yards in this game. And I know a lot of negativity is around Drew Aller's name right now. He's a good quarterback. I still think that he's going to be a first-round guy, personally. I really like him. I think he's a great player. And he's got a bad reputation because of the big games. And we know that extends past Drew Aller. They've lost 15 games in a row against top 10 opponents, and Drew Aller has not been around for all 15. A different guy has. But I think that Drew Aller is a great quarterback, and they held him to less than 200 yards. The defensive line dominated their offensive line. The secondary dominated their wide receiving core. And that's not something that I expected to say before the season, with 3 freshman defensive backs. Is it 3 freshman defensive backs? Flowers, Obadegwu, and Finney. And then Kingston Lopa rotates in at the other safety spot. But you know what I'm saying. It's a very young secondary. And they have been the most impressive group to me. They've come in to their college careers on fire. And it's been incredible to watch, really. So, how does this shift my expectation for the Oregon Ducks? Just to recap, before the season, I thought 10-2 with a ceiling of 11-1. I thought for sure they would at least lose in Happy Valley in the whiteout. They did not. I thought that Penn State was a true national championship contender. I did not think Oregon was. I thought they should get into the playoff. I did not think they would be a true national championship contender. Well, in Happy Valley, they showed that they can compete with anyone in the nation. They showed that they're not intimidated of anything. They're not outmatched personnel-wise. Their coaching staff, most importantly, their coaching staff showed that they solved issues that they had at the end of last year in big games. That's the most important thing. They've shown that Dante Moore is capable of being one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He's showed that he's capable of taking care of the football and making throws that will make him a first-round draft pick in next year's draft. So I have shifted my expectations, and I think that if things go right, the Oregon Ducks can win a national championship this year. I think that they are national championship contenders after this game. I was wrong in saying that they could not contend for a title. I was wrong saying that they could not beat Penn State. And I've never been more happy to be wrong, to be honest. Do I think that they will get there? No. Unfortunately, no. Here's the thing. Every time I get my hope, every single year this happens. Every single year. Oregon has some sort of win. I go into the year, I try to protect myself. I say you know, Oregon could be really good this year. I don't know if they'll win a national championship. And then the year starts going on, and they'll either win enough games in a row or win a big enough game where I say, all right, I'll believe in them. And then they let me down every single year. So I'm going to keep protecting myself. I'm going to say I'm going to put my money on the field on the national championship versus Oregon. In 2026, that could be a different story, especially if Dante Moore comes back. But for this year, I think they are contenders. I don't think that they get it done. But the games aren't played on paper, the games are played on the field. The games aren't played in my expectation. They're not played in my logical thinking. And hopefully I'm wrong about that, just like I was wrong about Penn State beating Oregon. As for the record, I still think that they will lose a game sometime through the year. I don't think that people are giving Indiana enough credit. Now they will be coming to Autzen Stadium. I've heard a lot of talk about Fernando Mendoza. He came to Autzen Stadium when he was a Cal Golden Bear and he struggled as a freshman. Forget it. He's a different player now. He's on a different team. He's got a few more years of experience. He's not the same player. And he's been there before, so he knows what to expect. So, I mean, if he throws 3 picks, then I'll be happy to be wrong, but I think that Indiana's being underrated. I am still picking Oregon to win that game. I would pick Oregon to win every game for the rest of the year. However, this is a really young team led by a quarterback who has started 10 games rather than a quarterback who's started 62 games. So I think that there's going to be a hiccup at some point in their season. Where that goes, where that hiccup comes, I would guess it's either against Indiana, at Iowa, or at Washington. By the way, Washington not really a real rival of Oregon. My opinion, I'm in a very small minority. Again, I feel like I'm saying that a lot today. I've got a lot of unpopular opinions. I just think that you're not rivals with someone you beat 75% of the time, in my opinion. But I think that they drop a game somewhere. I don't know who that's to. It would be an upset for sure. But I think they drop one somewhere. They finish the season 11-1. They get to the Big Ten championship, and that would be a coin flip game if it's against Ohio State. If it's against Penn State or Indiana, they probably win. Having watched last year, I would actually be hoping that they lose that game if that happens, because the winner is rewarded with a 3-week layoff, and the loser is rewarded with a 1-week layoff and getting a home playoff game against the number 11, 10 team in the country. And they get to work out the rust and then go into a neutral site game against a team that in theory is better but hasn't played in 3 weeks. And we saw how that can turn out. all 4 teams with byes in that college football playoff lost. So that's my opinion. I've realized I might have been very controversial in this podcast. I didn't go into this expecting to have so many unpopular opinions, but please leave your comments below. Tell me if I'm crazy. I'm open-minded, honestly. I'm open-minded to going back and watching for certain things that Dante Moore did better than I thought he did. Watching it the first time and then rewatching it. I'm open. So comment below what your thoughts are. Enjoy the bye week. Root against Ohio State. Maybe we'll be the number 1 team in the country again. Who knows? But for now, that's all. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode of the Soda Report. I will be doing an episode on the 49ers again. I just did one a couple days ago, but that Thursday night game changes things. And then I'll do one on the San Francisco Giants season. So tune in for those podcasts in the next few days. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Go Ducks.